Buddy, this is the spring meeting of the Pine Bush Reserve Commission. Looks like spring outside, so we'll call it spring. At least the calendar says so. Start off with some introductions. To my right, far end, is Mike Evely, and of course, you know, Chris Hauber, Gene Kelly, Elaine Balchinian, Harvey Alexander, Tony Rice, Tony Wilkinson, Steve Rice, I always do that. Mike Lyons, Don Sapos, John Brust, and Larry Eckhouse. Has everyone had an opportunity to go through the minutes from our last meeting? Is there any need for correction, modification, addition, etc.? If not, we can accept the motion to accept the minutes. Second. All in favor of adopting the minutes from the December 20th meeting, please say aye. Aye. Any against, say nay. Okay, they are adopted. I'd like to welcome the public. I don't know if there's anyone from the public who wishes to offer comments or questions. Feel free.
I read a piece of Conservationist, the last Conservationist magazine, about climate change, and it got me thinking about how Pine Bush fits in to that idea. And I was just wondering, I know we're doing well with the management plan, but this article talked about being proactive. I know that there's more invasives coming in the Pine Bush area. The Carter flu had 3 broods last year. We've got different birds migrating through the area. And I was just wondering how the Pine Bush fits in with the bigger picture.
You want to
Sure.
offer any comments on that topic?
Sure, good question. Climate change is obviously a topic that's on a lot of our minds as managers of a global river ecosystem. I have wondered about what the potential implications of climate change are in the Pine Bush. The short answer is we don't know exactly, but the data suggests that the Pine Bush, that pitch pine scrub oak barrens themselves are not exceptionally vulnerable to the forecasts of climate change, in particular because they can warmer and potentially drier would not necessarily be a bad thing for the ecosystem overall, but for certain species like the Carner, the frosted elfin that live within a pretty specific climate envelope, there's the potential. Our strategy to date has been to try and maximize the extent of pitch pine scrub oak barrens and build populations of those sensitive species up to the point where they can be buffered somewhat by a larger population size and by doing things like trying to put lupin on north-facing slopes so that there's a bit more of heterogeneity within the microhabitats that these species can be in and be supported in the preserve. I did assist the New Hampshire Department of Fish and Game. They did a statewide analysis of vulnerability of all of the ecosystems in the state of New Hampshire, and I participated on the panel for pitch pine scrub oak barrens. And by and large, pitch pine scrub oak barrens appear to be one of the potentially less sensitive ecosystems for the kinds of changes that are forecast as a result of a warming climate. That said, the big wild card is the fire regime. In particular, if the timing and seasonality of severe droughts and wet periods changes, it could alter when fires can happen, and when we have the ability to put prescribed fire on the ground, and that could have implications. But at this point, there's simply no data, so it's something that we as a staff are aware of and trying to keep our finger on the pulse of, and we'll continue to collect data and evaluate how vulnerable the system overall is and the species that are here over time.
And Paul, that's a great question, and you touched on invasive species. And of course, invasive species management / eradication is a big focus of the commission staff. In fact, some of the more visible projects that have been occurring since last summer or fall has been the work to get rid of black locust and other invasive plant species, some of which has been a topic of curiosity for the public, sometimes even outright opposition. because, you know, you've seen the eradication of a large number of trees. And some people are not necessarily in favor of that. They'd rather see a more wooded environment, but that's just not what the pine bush native habitat is all about. And I think as time goes on and as climate change continues to progress, obviously there will be a greater risk of more invasive species in the area, and not just plant life, but could be insect life as well. In fact, the department, DEC, is currently wrangling with the continuing spread of the emerald ash borer, which we recently discovered has actually made it into the Capital District. It's now in Albany County. We expect if we continue looking as we are, that we'll find that it's probably not limited to Albany County. We periodically set up roadside checkpoints for people who are moving firewood, because we think that's probably one of the leading, if not the leading, vectors of the spread of EAB. So we're vigilant, and I know that the Preserve Commission staff is vigilant, and so we're facing a lot of changes in our environment, and some of which may or may not be related to or affected by climate change, but certainly we are seeing a big change in our environment. And it's a good point you brought up with last year being, I think, the first year that there were 3 separate hatchings of Corner Blue, right? Was that the first year we documented that? That's a real watermark. I don't know whether that's good or bad. I guess it's probably a benefit, but that probably also means if that aspect of insect life is changing that drastically, there's probably other aspects that maybe we don't realize yet, some of which may not be beneficial. So, good point, and obviously the commission staff is very focused on it, and I think at this point we're hoping that on a more global level that more countries get involved in the effort, including our own, to really combat climate change. It's a great question, great comment. Any other comments or questions? Okay, thanks. We'll move to the report section. I have a couple of items that I'd like to mention. First is an update on something I think I raised at the last quarterly meeting. If not the last one, it might have been the one before, about the shipment of Hurricane or Superstorm Sandy debris that was coming to the Albany and Colony landfills. And we, DEC, temporarily allowed both those landfills to accept a greater volume of waste related to the downstate removal of all of the debris that was accumulated as a result of Superstorm Sandy. And that's about coming to an end. We expect that by sometime next month that virtually all of the debris that was generated as a result of that storm will have been moved out of downstate areas and disposed of, some of which ended up at the Albany landfill. So I wanted to update everyone on that because that's something I raised last time. Also, I just wanted to mention that later this month here at the Discovery Center, the Region 4 Forest Rangers will be conducting annual fire line refresher training, and I know that Preserve Commission staff are involved in that training as well. That'll be on March 28th, so if you happen to come by and see a bunch of ranger vehicles here or wonder what's going on, that's what's going on that day. And then finally, I just wanted to mention that we are celebrating this year an important anniversary, and that is 20 years of Chris Hoffer's affiliation with the Pine Bush Preserve Commission. I just wanted to say it's been obviously last 6 years that I've been involved has been great for me, and I've seen great things happen at the commission, but it goes way back beyond that. Chris started out as a young guy right out of college, and not such a young guy anymore. Compared to me, he still is, always will be. There's a little more gray in the beard than there was then, right?
Yes, there is.
But at least there's still
Some dark.
still some hair to get cut, you know?
Yep.
So that's good.
The hair.
I wanted to,
What's the problem?
John and
What do you
Larry
say?
are wondering what's going on.
Oh,
So, we do have some mementos to mark the occasion, so Lisa, if you would step forward. And I'm going to offer Lisa the opportunity to say a few words too, but I just want to say it's great having you as the leader of staff here and of the preserve. I think the Pine Bush is much better than ever before. And, good things are happening, and I know that they're going to continue to happen with your leadership. So, thank you. Nice job in 20 years.
Small token of appreciation. I haven't been here as long as you, but everybody here really appreciates all your hard work and your effort. And we're glad you're
Because you're significantly younger than me.
here.
Thank you.
It's always safe to make age jokes about that.
That's right.
You don't do that with women. They're very generous.
Thank you. That's very nice. I'm not much of a sentimental person, but last Friday was the actual 20-year anniversary of me starting. And so 20 years ago on March 15th was that superstorm that we had in 1993. So my first day of work, I was called at home and said, Chris, even though it's your first day, stay home. We had almost 30 inches of snow. But when I was walking out on Friday, when I was leaving after work on Friday, I turned around and I looked at the building and I said, you know what? And then I looked at the preserve and I said, we've done pretty well. So, 20 years, we've got now 3,200 acres, we have Discovery Center, we got a permanent staff of 16, we expand up to almost 24 with seasonals. We get a lot of work done, so, thanks.
So what'd you get?
I don't know. It's a business card holder.
Nice. Very nice.
And there's more in there too. And I can thank probably both Lisa and Margaret for,
And when?
and Wendy, sorry.
Anytime you start mentioning names, you're going to leave somebody out.
I'd like to thank the staff. Oh, cool. CAH, 20 years. Thanks.
I'll open the floor to any commission members that have any reports or items that they'd like to discuss. Okay. Hearing nothing, I will turn it over to you, Chris.
Okay. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Ben.
no,
Oh, sorry, thanks.
I think Chris just wanted me to give the commission members and staff a little bit of my background. Been here with the city since 2006, been the commissioner since 2007 in the Department of Development and Planning, and also the president of Capitalize Albany Corporation. So I'm involved in a pretty diverse set of functions here in the city, ranging from planning, zoning issues to economic development, community development. Been doing this line of work for about 20 years. I think I started my professional career in 1993 as well, so I'm coming up on 20 years of this line of work. I live in the dunes, so the Pine Bush is very near and dear to my heart, and spend a lot of time here. My son and I love snowshoeing in the winter and spending time in Pine Bush, so it's great to be part of this.
Thanks, Mike.
Welcome aboard, Mike. It's good to have you. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks. I just wanted to point out on the top of those of you who have an agenda, the logo, the 25-year logo. You mentioned that the Pine Bush Commission is celebrating 25 years. And we're hoping to do some sort of recognition in September, but I'd like to recognize Wendy Craney, who actually did this logo in-house. See, I don't always forget you, Wendy.
Very nice.
So throughout this year, you'll see that logo on all of our correspondence. I won't go over anything in the update, the green update in your packet. I'd like you to make sure that you take a look at it so you can see what the staff have been up to in the last quarter. There's a lot of stuff going on. Even if we went through the winter months, there's a lot of things that take place both in the field, in the Discovery Center, science, stewardship, you name it. Just a quick update, those of you who pay attention to the New York State budget, I do, since it's one of our primary, or it is our primary funding source for the commission to the EPF. I believe, let's see, our last meeting, we didn't have a governor's budget, so the governor released the executive budget at the end of January. It included the level $2 million funding from the EPF for the commission. At the beginning of last week, both houses in the legislature recognized that and kept that funding level, which was good. And as of last night, there's a conceptual budget between all the policymakers for the state. And budget bills were being drafted and printed last night, and I believe the budget should be done by Sunday. But we are level with that funding. And we have a number of new elected leaders in the state, in the Assembly and the Senate, some of which represent the Pine Bush, the commission, and our preserve, I should say. And some of those are just in the capital region, but they have constituents that use the preserve, that enjoy the preserve and the Discovery Center. So I spent some time with those new elected leaders, Assemblywoman Fahey, Assemblymember McDonald, Senator Katzik, Assemblymember Steck, Senator Breslin, who's been in office for well over a decade now, over 18 years, Assemblymember Engelbright, and new Assemblymember Santa Barbara. So they're all well aware of who we are, what we do, and support it. So that's good. And I think that's all I have.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. And it's precisely that kind of interaction with elected leaders that has helped to raise the profile of the preserve and the funding that comes with that. So I appreciate that very much, Chris. I think that's very valuable. Benefits of that kind of relationship pay off over and over again. Next, we'll turn it over to Neil for a report of the technical committee.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Hope the winter was kind to you.
Was.
It was.
Still is. I'll take one of those and pass
According to
it
the
down.
calendar,
A couple of things to go over this morning. First, though, the technical committee quarterly update. The committee met once in February last month. Project review remains relatively slow. We had two minor subdivisions in the town of Colony, one in a full protection area and one actually adjacent to that. And you can see a brief summary of those two projects there. In addition to that, we have also continued, and I've continued to keep track with the Albany landfill habitat restoration project, or the ecosystem mitigation, restoration, and enhancement project. The city's managing the project pretty well. I'm happy to report. I'm getting daily notifications whenever their staff or their contractors are in the preserve doing the restoration work. They host weekly project meetings that I attend. I also get weekly updates of what they did the previous week, as well as the plan for what they're going to do the coming week, consistent with the TRP. And their state permit, their Part 360 permit, requires that each year they submit an annual compliance report. Here is the 2012 annual compliance report, which I have read from cover to cover. Don't quiz me. There's a lot of great data in there, though.
That was a full pot of coffee, wasn't it?
A couple of months back. But I did want to briefly summarize what's in that report for your benefit. In 2012, they've effectively thinned 80 acres of forest in preparation for planting. They're continuing to manage the native plant nursery that they established, a 3.5-acre nursery in the former mobile home park. They have their consultants collecting and processing lots and lots of native seed for eventually restoring not only the 80 acres they just thinned, but also the landfill cap. They seeded 4 acres of test plots on the Greater Albany landfill, the closed portion of the landfill, last spring. So that's been seeded, and by fall, when the data's in there, there's a fair amount of, within those 4 acres, a fair amount of lupin and native grasses and wildflowers now growing within that 4 acres on the landfill. They also put up an electric fence around that. care of. They added trees and shrubs to the areas that they planted the previous year. They've managed invasive plants on over 100 acres of the preserve and around the landfill itself. They're continuing to manage and stockpile sand that was donated as a result of a couple of local projects, and manage not only those stockpiles, but also preventing erosion of those piles. And they've conducted extensive soil and hydrology monitoring throughout the habitat restoration project around to the north of the landfill through the mobile home park and all the way out to Raft Road. And what that report contains the most of is their extensive biological monitoring. They're monitoring, they set up transects and sample locations throughout the entire restoration area before they managed, and they're continuing to monitor those plots and transects every year, and that's for birds, butterflies, moths, reptiles and amphibians, and of course plants, so that we can look at before and after this pretty extensive restoration project. And they're managing the created wetlands, and which need a couple of modifications in 2013. Also this past week, their permit requires that each year they submit an annual plan of the work for the year. And then the department, the commission staff meets with the city and their consultants, actually in this room earlier this week, to go through the annual plan and figure out all the details of that, make minor adjustments before the city goes ahead and submits this annual plan for approval by DEC. So this is now, we made a few tweaks. This is going to Peter Ennis at the regional office of DEC. And once the department approves the annual plan, the commission then issues the city a temporary revocable permit for the work for the year, basically authorizing them to do what's in the annual plan. We hosted that meeting here earlier in the week. And they reported at that meeting that their primary ecological expertise, their consultants applied ecological services, is going to remain as their ecological consultant, at least for the coming year, which is good news. They're one of the best firms in the nation. Shifting gears a little bit, the other thing I wanted to report on is that, as you know, we contracted with H2H Associates to do baseline investigation of hydrology throughout the Albany Pine Bush. We really didn't have any contemporary information on what's happening beneath our feet in groundwater. I received a draft of that report and submitted a few comments back to them, and I expect to get the final report any day now. And they evaluated known data sources, and that report recommends actions that we, the commission, can take to fill informational gaps and set up a long-term monitoring program, which is great because I know that Erin and her education staff are working to build an educational program around hydrology and groundwater. And obviously we have rare wetlands and rare species that depend on that groundwater. And the last thing I wanted to touch base on today, and Gene, you've probably seen this, and I don't know if Elaine, you have, but starting in 2010 in this very room, the Northeastern Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies started thinking about the fact that, as we have seen here in the Pine Bush, managing and creating shrubland habitat, particularly if it involves removing trees, can be potentially controversial, and people don't always appreciate that you're removing trees for a reason. You can take one of those and pass them around. Similarly with this brochure. So the Northeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, which represents all of the states, in fact the DECs of 13 northeastern states, they decided at a meeting that they wanted to have that they really need to begin developing an educational campaign, an educational program to be able to talk to people so that natural resource professionals can more effectively talk to people and address some of the controversial aspects of creating what we've called as part of this campaign the young forest habitat, or habitat for wildlife that depends on effectively habitats that are dominated by shrubs and saplings. NEAFWA's been interested in this for a while because regionally you've got American woodcock plants, you've got New England cottontail plants, you've got ruffed grouse plants. All three of those species are declining throughout the region, need this kind of habitat. And because the pine bush effectively provides lots of early successional or young forest habitat, or these habitat that functions that way for wildlife, and we're in an urban area doing things like thinning forests, doing some clear cutting, applying prescribed fire, all in a heavily urban and highly visible way, they invited the commission and myself to help co-chair this campaign. So this project started in 2010 in this very room. And in that time, we've we've now built a number of resources. We unveiled the Communications Handbook at the Society of American Foresters meeting in Saratoga last month. We had a 4-hour workshop. Various entities, folks from New Hampshire Fish and Game, myself. We were able to get Tom Nardacci from Gramercy Communications over in Troy. Tom offered his expertise to help us understand. He taught a Communications 101 session. It was a 4-hour workshop, and we're going to do that 4-hour workshop again at the Northeast Fish and Wildlife Conference in Saratoga in April. So in addition to the handbook, which is for natural resource professionals, there's the brochure. There's also a website, youngforest.org, that will have additional resources, including all of these tools, the talks, the presentations that we gave at the workshop. And effectively, the 13 states are working together to try and make sure that there's enough habitat on the ground for wildlife that depends on early successional habitat. And the reason we chose young forest, any of you that have worked with communications in any way, early successional, what is early successional? So it's a loaded term, it's a technical term, so we tried to boil it down and work with communication specialists to boil this concept down to something that the general public can understand and appreciate. So effectively, it's young forest. It was the term that we came up with. For better or worse, some people like it, some people don't. But overall, the materials have been very well received. The training workshop, we had 33, 34 people, and they stayed throughout the entire thing. And we actually included, all the instructors say we broke it out into 4 workshops. Rick was there, as well as Joan Kennedy, who helped us do this. So we had role playing, where we had a camera set up for media specialists. We had Tom Nardacci pretending to be an elected official, and we had the turns trying to communicate with him. And it went very, very well. So it's been fun and challenging to work on this project, but it's also helped, I think, the commission. We're really well represented now throughout the northeastern United States with all of these fish and wildlife agencies in a way that, we used to be with the Conservancy. The Conservancy in the past provided us with that network, with that channel, that vehicle to be able to really get the word out about the work that we're doing here. And now we're trying to partner up with DEC and other agencies like DEC throughout the Northeast to continue to get that word out and maintain support for ourselves, but also realize that we're part of a larger conservation initiative for wildlife that depends on this kind of habitat. With that, I'll
Thank you, Neil.
Question,
Harvey.
do you have access to the areas on the landfill so that you can actually see if they're doing everything that they're talking about?
Yes. Yeah, I coordinate that with the city staff. Joe Giebelhouse, who's the landfill manager, has been nothing short of stellar in managing this project, communicating with the commission, and providing our staff with the ability to get out there and see what's going on. But, yeah, the fact that he invites me to sit in on these weekly meetings is fantastic. Communication is better than something.
Any other questions for Neil? Thank you, Neil. I mean, this is, to me, this is emblematic of the kind of scientific and academic leadership that the Preserve Commission staff have continued to build over the past several years. And it obviously raises the profile of the Albany Pine Bush Preserve, and it brings the much-deserved recognition to the staff of the commission, who are doing great work in managing the preserve and making it more accessible and more understood by the public. With that segue, I'll hand it over to Jeff Fulmer for the report on the Discovery Center. Obviously, one of the main focuses of the Discovery Center is to translate that sort of scientific and technical research and work that Neil and the other staff and Joel and all of the people that work with them are doing, so that the educators are able to then make that in an accessible format for the public. So, over to you, Jeff.
Thank you. I'm going to offer a lot of numbers today, starting with a pretty big bang. I think it's pretty amazing. In 2012, the Discovery Center saw a 20% increase in attendance at public programs and a 34% increase in visitorship for the year. So To me, a 1 or 2% increase would have been commendable, but this is just out of the ballpark. So congratulations to Discovery Center staff for all their hard work to make that all possible. We've also partnered successfully with MySci, the Museum of Innovation and Science, formerly the Schenectady Museum, in co-promoting our missions based on a new butterfly exhibit at MySci. And I did an interview with Neil Gifford. Neil Gifford and I did an interview with MySci Executive Director on WAMC's roundtable to discuss butterflies, the MySci exhibit, the new book, the Mr. Carter Blue, and the mission of the Albany Pine Bush Preserve Commission. They have about 500,000 listeners weekly, and the geographic range of WAMC is up into Canada, into the edges of New York City, out to Syracuse, and out to the Pioneer Valley in Massachusetts. So it's a huge demographic. I also co-organized and attended a forum for New York State Nature Center administrators that Elaine was at, held at the Montezuma Audubon Center in Savannah, New York, and it was very well attended and widely, I think, unanimously considered successful. People seem to want to do this on an annual basis. In terms of outreach, due solely to our promotional efforts, Mr. Carter Blue has generated interviews and articles in the Times-Union, the Daily Gazette, WAMC, and numerous others, and several of these were, page 1 articles. So it was, it's been great publicity for us. And a book launch event for the book attracted over 200 attendees. We participated in several other outreach events. The Hannaford Kids Expo, where we had a booth and our Pine Bush car was on display. Approximately 10,000 people attended that, with almost 1,300 stopping by our booth. Our partnership with MySci includes a standalone display at their butterfly exhibit, where visitors have now exceeded 15,000. Talking about the 25th anniversary, we've been promoting that in numerous ways, including branding all our public materials with the new logo. We're planning an event possibly down the road. We partnered with LL Bean during the holiday season with 10,000 bag stuffers. We were chosen to be featured in the 2013 Albany Visitors Guide with a print run of 125,000. We have now over 1,500 followers on Facebook. Our billboard in the late December is estimated to have had 585,000 impressions. Our winter newsletter went out to about 4,000 people online and in print. In terms of education, we had a busy winter schedule of public programs from December to February. We had over 1,200 participants in the people participating in programs ranging from the kids programs to the adult programs. Over the midwinter school break, the Discovery Center offered a new series on nature and art for children. This winter, education staff presented another session of the very popular Pine Bush Pups, which is nature-themed education for children age 1 to 5. The staff have begun a planning process for live animal programs at the Discovery Center, where we've set up a committee led by education, developing an animal program policy that will guide future decisions on the use of live animals at the Discovery Center. That's my report. Any questions?
Jeff, is there one thing that you think is of all of those things, that drove the 34% increase in walk-ins?
I think all of those things.
It was, okay.
Yeah, I think it's been a combination, and and in some ways, all the work that we're doing, it's I would say it's focused on outreach and education, but it certainly has a great deal to do with everything else that's going on. Because without that, we have nothing to promote. The Discovery Center is what we talk about. So that would be my assessment. Pretty much.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
One thing
Yes.
you missed, Jeff. Last week, Metroland
Missed something?
Yes. Last week, Metroland came out with their best ofs in the Capital District, and the Pine Bush Commission had a couple, were the top 3 of a couple of the best of the Capital Districts.
Terrific. I did not know that. So I'll look for that. That was just last week?
Yeah. Comes up.
Great, we did miss one.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. And before we move on to Lisa, I just wanted to give Chris the opportunity to mention since it's related to the Discovery Center, an event that's coming up next month.
So for Earth Day, past few years we've had an event for Earth Day, and Jesse Hoffman is, I'm looking at him, he's leading our Earth Day project. Again, this year it's April 20th. It starts at 9, am I correct? Gene will be here to welcome our volunteers. Last year we had close to 150 volunteers signed up, but it rained. But we still had a lot of people show up, and we got a lot of work done. This year, we've got a lot of projects, everything from habitat work to trail cleanup to boundary posting, all kinds of things. So that's, again, April 20th, it's a Saturday at 9 o'clock. Thanks for reminding me.
Chris, if I may also, since we're going to plug events, May 18th is our Lupin Fest this year. Is that the right date, May 18th?
That's right.
So Saturday, May 18th, worth plugging one.
That's right. Absolutely.
Are you guys plugged into I Love My Park Day at all? It's May 4th. So it's May 4th, and it's it was launched last year by Parks and Trails New York.
Oh, yeah.
And the governor made a big deal about it last year. And it's primarily state parks and historic sites, but many local, municipal, other parks are participating. So you can officially sign up online, and then people can search the site for an event near you. And we've enjoyed like tremendous help on that day. So you might think about
Yeah.
it's an easy way to get people in.
Check it out.
Yeah, it's a great mention. Okay, let's turn it over to Lisa for our financial report.
Good morning. So everybody will please stand. Financial packets. We begin with our statement of financial activities. And this represents our figures as of January 31st, 2013. Under revenue, our dues and contributions are higher than budget, and this is due to an increase in donations this year specifically from the Friends Group and our trust and endowment. Our grant income is coming in at 86%, and this is directly related to our expenses. We will maximize the state appropriation in the final quarter of this year. Mitigation revenue is slightly under budget, and this is based on a decrease in tonnage from the landfill. Investment income is 0, actual to budget, and the lease revenue is slightly higher than budget, and this is due to an increase in seasonal staff programs out. Other revenue is higher than budget, and this is due to increase in both program fees for school and public programs and merchandise sales. So our total revenue came a little bit lower than budget at 89% through the month of January, and this is primarily reflected in grant revenue and mitigation revenue. Moving on to expenses, personnel and fringe are under budget at 92%, and this is due to the governor's decision not to grant merit. Instead, this year we budgeted for it, that's in the budgeted number. Travel and training, this is under budget due to both weather conditions for primarily controlled burn boss services, and 2 conferences that we budgeted this year that will occur in April instead of our year end is March 31st. Contractual, we're at 67% of our budget. Some of this is due to a reclass of contractual expenses to fixed assets and weather conditions and a few projects that we did not complete this year. Communications is coming in at 45%. This is due to a savings in postage, internet, and phone services, and some advertising that we have not incurred as of January 31st, but we did incur in February and March. Occupancy is down due to a significant savings in our electric bill. This was negotiated by our property management firm, Carol. And this includes both the electric bill, delivery of electric service, and also lower gas prices. So we hope to continue to see the savings next year. Supplies and equipment, this is based on conservative spending in the beginning of the year. And also we capitalized a few items that were budgeted under supplies and equipment through January. We've made several purchases recently, so this will bring up close to our budget number. Other expenses, this is on budget. So our expenses came in at 82%, our revenue at 89%. This gave us a significantly higher net income. of 8270 through the month of January. Are there any questions?
On the occupancy and the energy, what was the cause of it? What did they do what did they actually do to help that?
I'll turn this over to you.
Carol's our property, Carol Real Estate, they're a property manager. So they've negotiated rates for all their buildings in New York and Pennsylvania with National Grid, NICE is one of them, to get lower electrical rates. And we pay for wind power, pay credits, wind credits, and they negotiated a lower rate for that. And we also budgeted high for gas, and gas is coming really low. Really low. And I can, it would be like, I'm sure it's sure.
Any other questions? Okay. Moving on to our statement of net assets. Under assets, our operating cash decrease, and this is due to paid expenditures each month. This will vary as a function of invoices paid. Conservation land reserves remained unchanged. Grants receivable, this is our state grant funding due for October through December, and this was paid. Accounts receivable, this was money owed for our quarterly mitigation, October through December, and this was also paid. Inventory increased slightly due to purchases from our gift shop. Prepaid expenses decreased due to the timing of year-end expenditures, and this will increase in March for year-end allocations. Investments in capital assets. Our investments had a positive performance in all three of our accounts through December in January, increasing approximately $182,000. Capital assets increased due to recent purchases. Bringing our total assets increase of $145,000 due to an increase in grants, accounts receivable, and investment in capital assets. Moving on to liabilities. Accounts payable and accrued expenses decreased due to the reduction of accounts payable. Deferred revenue increased due to mitigation funds from National Grid, specifically for work under the power lines. Total liabilities decreased due to the reduction of accounts payable on this line. Moving on to net assets. Investments in capital assets increased due to purchases this year. Our reserved assets, there was a slight decrease. This was just an adjustment made to reconcile our expense accounts. And unreserved, this increased due to a positive NOI and an increase in investment income. Overall, total net assets increased due to the positive net income and a positive performance in all of our investment accounts and capital assets. Are there any questions on that? Okay, final report. This is our investment summary, and this is through January 31st. The reserve fund is doing well with a 4.76% gain through January 31st. Discovery Center endowment and the endowment both have a positive performance, coming in at 5.67 and 6.84% gain through the month of January. Overall, our investments had a positive performance with a gain of $182,000 through January. And February was even better. Okay. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we're fortunate today to have Cindy Barford and Mike Duran from KeyBank here to give us a report on the investments. Morning.
Thanks. Good morning, and thanks for having us back another year. We're pleased to be part of working with you. It's been 3 or 4 years now. And we're glad, as you said, we had a positive year last year, and hopefully this year started out the same way. The first page you're going to see is just a summary. And before we leave, if you guys could give us some flyers. Last year we put out the branches. As you know, we have a large, delivery system. And I think it helped out. A lot of our branch people did not know that, the center was here and used it during the break for their children. So I got some great calls from people saying, my kids went and they used some of program. So it's that time of the year again, spring breaks. Before I leave, if I can grab some, I'll get them delivered through our system, which is great. So this first page I just presented to you was just a review of the relationship with Key. We manage both deposits and investments. We have 2 checking accounts, and I've updated current balances. As of yesterday, the balance in the primary account was $1,039,367. This account is strictly used for your working capital. You know, it kind of goes up and down, but you know, it is carrying a substantial balance at this point, and we talked about it with the audit committee. And then there is a second account, which is a reserve account, and that has, you know, $626,459 in it. Those are non-interest-bearing accounts. So when we discuss, we thought there may be some opportunities to move it to Mike to manage, and he'll go over the management of the accounts and how that's performed, because they have been good years. We have a reserve account that we did put excess cash into, I think, a year ago. And, you know, in really some investments that are, you know, look to preserve capital, will give you a better return than the other bank side. So with that, I'll let Mike talk about the other accounts that are managed.
Thanks, Cindy. You guys are doing a pretty good job staying on time here, so we'll try not to drag out here go too long. As Cindy mentioned, the overall relationship, kind of on the banking side, I'm responsible for overseeing the investment portfolios of not only the endowment, but also the reserve and the Discovery Center portfolios. The 3 portfolios are fairly similar for those who have the reports. What I'm going to do is focus on the endowment fund numbers, because they do kind of summarize for the other 2 as well. The first page, or the second page in the presentation, the relationship summary page with the 2 pie charts. Overall, the investment objective that has been agreed upon through the investment policy statement of the Audit and Finance Committee, as well as conversations with Key, is one of growth and income. Meaning there's a slight edge, slightly more of a focus on growth rather than generating income for the portfolio. And this has, you know, been put together for the 3 or 4 years we've been managing the assets. Overall, the value of the portfolio as of March 8th, when I put the presentation together, is roughly $2,517,328. That's obviously gone up over the last few weeks here. To give a ballpark idea of the actual dollar growth from a year ago, in February of 2012, the value of that same portfolio was $2.3 million. So it's roughly about $200,000 increase over a year ago, and that'll bear out some of the performance numbers in a moment. The only withdrawals in the portfolio for the year were $18,377. You can see that in the lower right, lower left-hand corner. That's the fee structure. One of the things we do is by taking all 3 of the portfolios together, we base the fee structure on the overall relationship. So there's actually sort of a price break there in terms of the cost of the management of the portfolio. The total annual income generated just by the endowment fund is a little over $50,000 a year in income, but the real focus of the portfolio, again, is one of growth rather than generating those dollars. I've got some information on the next few pages about the equity diversification and the fixed income diversification. But really, the main focus of the portfolio is to be about 2/3 in equities and about 1/3 in fixed income. And that's a strategy that's been put in place over the last 3 or 4 years, and it's the longer-term goal is to maintain that balance. On occasion, we have the ability through the investment policy statement to kind of tweak those numbers and go up or down as we see fit based on what the market may be indicating to us is a good idea. So overall, the performance has been very, very good for the portfolio. I'm going to page 5 in your presentation packet. Last year, for last calendar year, in 2012, the total portfolio for the endowment fund was up just over 10%, 10.20% for the year. What I also did is I included the last 3 years as a total, so I included 2010 through to the end of 2012 number. That annualized number worked out to be about 5.3%. So when you take into account last year's very good performance in the overall stock market, about 10.2% for the portfolio, couple that with 2011, which was a very difficult year. We always tend to forget the bad years, once we go through another good year. And then 2010 was more of an average market performance year. The overall average for the 3 years is about 5.3%. Since the inception of the portfolio with Key Private Bank, since the management has begun, the total annualized return, so the annual return is 7.39% for the total portfolio. That takes into account both the equities and the fixed income piece. And really my role and our role as the investment manager is to take a look at the investment policy statement. And I want to give a special kudos to the Audit and Finance Committee because they did a really good job of drafting that document. The investment policy statement is probably the most important document that an endowment or a foundation for a nonprofit can draft. Because what it does is it establishes the guidelines for us to manage the assets in a responsible manner. So it's not necessarily about achieving the highest return you can each year. That's a good thing if you can, but it's really about being responsible with the amount of risk you're undertaking to get there. And the document has done a very good job. It's built to last in good years as well as bad years. So through 2011, one of the focuses that the committee paid attention to was not to make drastic changes in the investment strategy simply because of a poor performance here. The idea is to look long term, and it's really paid off, as you can see with the annualized numbers at about almost 7.5% a year for the portfolio. So right now, I would, from our measure and from the conversations with the Finance Committee, the portfolio structure for all three portfolios, the endowment center, the reserves, and the endowment fund, they're all in the proper structure, the proper investments, and the proper position very well for the long term. Does anyone have any specific questions about any of the investments, any strategies? Good. Looking good. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I'll just say it's been a pleasure working with you guys. You explain everything well. You give us all the detail we need. Your presence at our committee meetings is much appreciated. You do a good job. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I just wanted to follow up on that. John, as treasurer, and Don and Mike as an appointee to the audit committee, if you want to chime in. Cindy mentioned if you look at the document that was handed out, it's the current relationship overview. That second account, that basic business checking account, that sits in a non-interest bearing account. It's a cash account. And the audit committee had a conversation about moving that into an investment account, putting it into our reserves, our investment reserves, which is part of what Lisa went over. And that's certainly within the investment policy. And the big question, of course, was, is it still liquid? How liquid is it? And are there fees if we move it? And the committee specifically asked Mike that. And it's nearly as liquid as it is now. We can get it when we need to. And based on 4%, John pointed out, we could make $25,000 a year. So I think we're going to make that move unless anybody has any concerns.
We did the same thing. We had multiple accounts, moved it all, the extra cash the right way.
Yeah.
Daily operation, it's in there.
How often do you access that account?
We would only access it if you see the account above it, this is 1.39. That's the functioning account.
Right,
So
no, the question was how often, I know what it is, the
We-
question is how often do you access it?
We haven't accessed it in 2 years because we've been getting timely reimbursements.
And I think one thing to point out also is that you're only federally insured up to $250,000
Right.
also.
That's right.
And that was another reason that when the committee was talking to Mike and Cindy to look at investing in it as well.
Right. Right, because the risk is so low. Next one. Any other comments from the board? Okay.
Okay, the next presentation will be somewhat related to some of the issues that Neil brought up about the habitat restoration. We'll hear from Joel, specifically focusing on the habitat restoration project.
Thank you, James.
Okay. Well, everybody, thank you for coming to this meeting that you had to come to. One of the advantages of for people like Chris and I who worked here for a while, since I started not long after Chris, so I've been here 18 years, is that you get to see the results of what we've been talking about trying to do as far as management is related. You actually get to see it happen. If you're here for a year or two, you may not be as aware of it, but over a longer period of time, you get to see it. And I remember when I first started walking around with my supervisor at the time, and we were walking around at Blueberry Hill, down in this part of the preserve, which is, for the most part, pretty much just a wasteland. As far as pine barrens is concerned. There's very little pine barrens there. There's all invasive, black locust, honeysuckle, bittersweet. Just a big mess. And I remember walking around with her and just saying, we're just looking at it all and saying, you know what? Why did we even get this? I mean, we're never going to be able to do anything with all this stuff. Well, 18 years later, it's quite dramatic to sort of see the change. And so Chris had asked that I just update a little bit on kind of what that's looked like, as well as give you a little bit of a sense of what are some things we're looking at for this coming year and a little bit in the future. So that's what we're gonna do here. A lot of this you all probably already know. I think we'll stand over the side here. But basically, we have a 3,200 acre preserve, and it's still growing, slowly but surely. We're still adding to it. And what is this place really about? Well, I tell people it's about sand. Really, the pine bush is all about sand. I know all these birds and butterflies and things get all the attention, but really the sand is what drives this place. And most of you who have been also here for a while know all this. Maybe some of you are a little newer to it. But sand is something that, for those of us who are involved with the management, we really get to see a lot more of it on a regular basis than maybe most people do. But it's the sand and it's those dunes that really make the inland pine barren something pretty special. But of course, we have to recognize all this other stuff, which decided that it also liked sand, and it decided to colonize it and hang out on it and live on it, and it makes the pine bush a pretty cool place to work as well as to visit. So there are really two major goals that the management plan and the commission has outlined. And the first one is one that we talk about a lot, but we talk about protecting, restoring, and maintaining a viable pine barrens. That's really what the big goal is, but it's that restore part, the second word there, that has been the focus of a lot of our work for a long time now, because we didn't get a perfect place. When we bought the pine bush and all the land that makes up the 3,200 acres we have, a lot of it, like I mentioned, like the Bluebird Hill, was significantly degraded. It was in bad shape. And so that restoration part has been a lot of what I've been doing, and a lot of the other staff we're doing to try to set the clock back, to get rid of some issues and things that are a problem here. So the overall goal is to have 2,000 acres of inland pine barrens variants, and we're currently at almost 1,000 acres. So it's still a ways to go, and even that 1,000 acres has some issues. It's not perfect, and we're working to try to update and basically even restore some of that in a less dramatic way. And then the other goal that really has to be mentioned, which I know we have a whole education staff that do this for us already, and the Discovery Center is obviously a big piece of the puzzle. But a lot of the management that goes on the ground is seen by the people who come visit the place. And they're the ones who have all the questions, and they want to know what's going on and why we're doing this. A lot of natural areas, we buy them, and we kind of leave them alone. Pine Bush isn't that way at all. It's a place that is actively managed, and people who come visit it want to know why. They want to know what in the world we're doing to this place. A lot of it looks pretty nasty. When they come out on the trails and all of a sudden, one week, the forest there, the next week they come out and it's just wide open sand, they get pretty confused. And so the education staff do a good job helping explain all that. So active management is a little different, like I said, because this place really needs some significant work done to turn it into what we really think it should be. 150 years ago, it's probably in pretty good shape. But we basically have a couple of issues. One is fire suppression. It's been going on here for probably, 75, 85, 95 years. And that fire that we mention all the time is the key component, but it's also the hardest component to try to restore this place. Also, fire doesn't really restore some of these degraded areas like the black locust areas, for example, very well. In the early years, we tried burning some of them. And you know what you got? If you could even burn it, you got more of the same. So we learned very quickly some of those techniques with fire don't work. And so we have to use other types of methods to restore the pine barrens. Invasive plants are a big one. It's already been mentioned a little bit. Gene mentioned it and others. But this is something that's been a big focus of a lot of my energy and time. If we're actually going to get the quality pine barrens restored. It took a long time for it to get to this point, 8,500 years, whatever, of fire suppression. It's going to take a long time to get back. And all these areas are going to take that longer to really start to look like a really good pine barrens again. So we mentioned fire. This is from a burn that we did actually last fall, right outside Discovery Center here in the field. Obviously, fire is a challenge, and this is not a fire talk, but we all know that fire in the urban interface is incredibly difficult. Not impossible, but very difficult. So what do we have now? Like I mentioned before, we have about 1,000 acres, give or take, that are in the Pine Barrens variants. And then we have another 2,000 acres that is wetlands and northern hardwood forest, southern successional hardwood forest. So what we're trying to do is get as much of that other stuff, not the wetlands we like now, but a lot of the other ones we're trying to convert back to a pine barrens. Still a lot of acres to go if we're going to try to get to 2,000 acres and kind of reverse this. So here's a quick snapshot of what we've been doing over the last almost 20 years. And everything in yellow shown on the map here is an area where we've done some sort of management, excluding fire. Fire is not part of this, although obviously all these areas have been burned by the commission. But this is showing you places over that whole 3,200 acres where we've done some sort of other kind of management in the preserve. And there's some numbers to go along with it. With black locust, over 250 acres, planting and interseeding into the barrens as well as locust sites. Aspen girdling, we did that from early on. You've all probably heard about that one, where we had groups of kids going out and girdle the trees by hand, but it's really slow. And so over an 18-year period, we probably girdled maybe 150 acres. Over the last 3 years, using another method that I'll talk about a little bit later, we've treated over 1,000 acres. Scrub oak thinning, something else we've been working on. I'm going to go into these a little more detail. White pine removal work and mowing of scrub oak pine barrens as well. So this is kind of the issue, is that some of this is pretty bad looking stuff in the short term. And as Gene mentioned, we did some road edge work this last fall, which was pretty visible. A lot of our work that we've done up to this point has been sort of hidden back in the preserve somewhere. Someone coming down the trail might run into it, but we don't have a lot of the public necessarily seeing it right in their face. Some of it just isn't pretty in the beginning. Prescribed fire is the tool we'd like to use the most. If we had the option, we just like to use that, but it's not always the best initially, and it's, like I said, the hardest. So we do invasive plant treatments, we do vegetation thinning, we do restoration planting. And the primary tools we use are mechanical or chemical, and biological is something that we're looking at with spotted dappley for this coming summer. That'll be our first effort in that area. So I'm just going to real quickly touch on some of these that I mentioned, just so, I wish I could drag you all out there during the process so you could really see it happening. Because some of it's pretty dramatic, it's big, huge equipment. It's dramatic changes to the landscape. Black locust is the one we've been doing since 2000, so about 13 years of this work now. And it basically takes a site that looks like this, an area that is pretty much dominated by black locust, which is clonal, so it tends to exclude just about everything else. You'll see a couple of pitch pines hiding in there, trying to hang on once in a while. And the understory is just more weeds. It pretty much wipes out all the good pine barren stuff. So we come in there with things that look like some sort of Star Wars machine, like this feller buncher. And this is a machine that can basically cut off trees, grab multiple trees, and then lay them down in a stack to be skidded away. And it doesn't seem like it makes sense in a preserve. We're preserving it, right? Well, when people see this stuff, it seems counterintuitive. What are you doing? Why are you ripping everything down when you're supposed to be protecting it? Well, it's because ripping down stuff is bad. That's what it comes down to. So here's a site where black locust was all around this cluster of pitch pines. Now it's laying on the ground, getting ready for the next stage, which is your typical big logging equipment, skidders, things that drag it out. And then the wood is either used as firewood, fence posts, whatever. A lot of it has been chipped over the years because there's markets for the chips. So it's been disposed of that way. Black locust is great wood, but sometimes it's hard to find markets for it because there's a lot of firewood in the capital district. But we have found contractors who have had places where you can use it rather than just throwing it away. So this is what the site starts to look like. Remember we talked about sand? How much is about sand? Well, here it is. We're going right back to post-glacier, the lake, Glacier Lake Albany washing out. And we're back to sand with just a couple of trees left here and there. Of course, we leave pitch pines if they're there, and oak trees to some degree. We have a couple of those scattered through. But this is what we kind of end up with. It's pretty dramatic. I mean, it's a huge change, and we often do 30 to 50 acres a year. So areas that people saw one year as a forest, this next year they come back like this.
Joel, do the pitch pines regenerate themselves as well? Or do you largely have to plant them if you want more of them?
It depends on the site. If the site has absolutely no pitch pine nearby, that we can get some seed rain coming in and actually naturally seeding it, then we actually go in and plant the seedlings. But we do find that as soon as you expose the mineral soil, the sand, the seed rain off these trees, you get thousands of some seedlings in these areas. It's been pretty dramatic. But we do help it along sometimes. So maybe a year after we did all that clearing work, this is what it might look like. Looks like a weedy mess again, kind of. Even though we planted in here, a lot of the stuff we plant takes a couple of years to really start to show. And you do have a seed bank of particularly annual species that just comes in and looks really bad. But over time, they start to give out, and the natives that we planted start to come in again. And this is just an aerial shot just showing you, this is about a 30-acre locust clone off of Willow Street that we took out a number of years ago, just to give you a sense of the change in the landscape that we're doing. But that's the goal, is to get it back into a pine barrens. It'll probably look like one in 50 years. So after we've cleared the site, then we have to go in and plant it. And I had to put Jesse in here in his famous picture. Jesse is our seed collection guru. He's done an incredible job over the last number of years, recruiting volunteers, getting all kinds of maps made up, because we collect almost all of our seed right here in the preserve that we use for our restoration planting. And without the seed, we're kind of stuck. We're going to end up with a locust clone again, but that's going to come back in probably. So we use volunteers and collect all the seed, and then we use this device called a seed drill. We do this ourselves in-house, and we plant all these sites. All right, so that's probably our most dramatic restoration technique that we've been using for a number of years. This was also pretty dramatic just because when you see the picture of the guy standing by this big lawnmower, you realize just how big the machine is. But mowing is another tool that we can use to sort of try to mimic fire a little bit. Obviously, it doesn't do all the same things that fire does, but it does have the ability at least to knock down the structure of the scrub oak, to open it back up again, let sunlight back into the other species that are desperately trying to hang on underneath the scrub oak. 1995, is that when we first did the mower? So we started in 95, so we've been doing this for a long time. And there's just another shot of the hydrax moving through this area. And one of the things we did a number of years ago was we did a mow and burn technique. I think others have already talked about that with you, but basically, after we mowed it in the spring, we let it grow back a bit, and then burned it in the summer. And all that mowing slash carried the fire beautifully, very slowly, controllably. We liked that. It was a slow fire because of the green revegetation that came up, but it was very effective, particularly at removing that organic layer. So adding the mowing to the burning is really a nice combination. We're going to try some of that again this year.
Joel, does that present timing issues with grassland birds nesting and things like that?
Yes. We generally try to time the mowing so that we're before the nesting season. And the burning to a large degree happens after the nesting season. I mean, we're often into late July, August, so hopefully we're missing, right? We're kind of missing the most busy nesting time.
And we typically treat such small areas at a time with fire that, on balance, it doesn't have a big impact on the wildlife.
Right. Scrub oak thinning. So the issue here has been that, again, in the absence of fire, the pine barrens, which tend to have a more open structure, have closed in, and scrub oak has been the dominant plant to try to take over in these areas. And so the last couple of years, we've done some chemical treatments. Chemicals on the bottom of our list. We don't like it. If we can find anything else that works first, we do that. But we found that some of these plants are very tenacious. They don't like to give up, and that's good in some ways. But at least as far as a one-time treatment, we oftentimes have to go to a chemical method. So what we're doing is pretty much going from something that looks like this to something much more open. There's spaces between the clumps of scrub oak. There's places for other species like lupin to be able to thrive and get sunlight. That's going to benefit obviously the butterfly. But we're trying to go from really thickets more to a barrens. And that's just sort of an example of kind of what our final result might really look like over time. That's more what we want most of the pine barrens to be. Okay, so if that isn't enough destruction, we then decided to go in and into an area that had really beautiful pitch pine all through it, but was completely, they're all being choked out by white pine. White pine's native, belongs in the pine bush, but again, in the absence of fire, which it can't tolerate, we ended up with this area really being choked out. And so we came in, took out a lot of white pine, and we replanted that last year and hoping to release butterflies into this site this year. I briefly mentioned aspen girdling, something we've been doing since 1995. A technique that works really well. The beauty with aspen that differentiates it from locust is that in the understory, you usually have almost all of your typical pine barrens plants. They're under there, whereas locust just wipes them all out. So if you can just kill the aspen trees, the pine barrens will come right back. You don't have to do any planting. You don't have to do anything else fancy. Hopefully we get fire in here someday. But otherwise, all you have to do is kill the trees. And so we use a technique called girdling. We have Farnsworth Middle School kids coming for years who peel the bark off the trees in the spring, and that effectively kills the trees and prevents resprouting. If you just came in with a chainsaw and cut them all down, every one you cut down, 100 come up. So this method is, because of the way the trees work, actually helps kill the tree and kill the root system. But we aren't trying to eliminate all the aspen. Aspen is a good species. We want some, but again, without fire. However, it's slow. It's very labor intensive, and so 3 years ago, we switched over to another method that we trialed for a while, using glyphosate as a chemical treatment. Basically, drill a hole or a number of holes in the sides of the aspen tree, and then put herbicide immediately into those holes. It's very targeted. It's very specific, and it's 100% effective. It works really well. So we've been able to move through over 1,000 acres in the last couple of years. Contracted that work. We didn't do that with volunteers. But again, it works really well. Gene mentioned this one. So a lot of this has kind of been out in the woods and hidden. This one wasn't. This last fall on Old State Road and Kings Road, we had a number of aspen trees and locust trees right along the road edge. Well, if we go and drill and fill those and leave them there, they're going to fall eventually, and they're going to end up in the road. So that's not a good situation. So what we actually ended up doing was coming in with a contractor, having him remove those trees, and then treat the stumps chemically with the glyphosate. So there's kind of a before and after. We did get a fair number of public inquiries about this. People wanted to know what was going on. Okay, complaints. All right. And it's understandable. I mean, I'm a tree lover as much as anybody. You know, my family can't understand it. All I do at work is kill stuff, kill trees, you know, and yet I say I like trees, but anyway. So, you know, it's a dramatic change, but if we're going to turn it back to a pine barren, the forest is going to have to be opened up. The invasive plants are going to have to be eliminated in these areas. This one we haven't done yet. And this one we wanted to mention to the commission just so you have a heads up, because this is another one which could probably get a little bit of attention from the public. Pitch pine trees, right? It's the pine bush. But we're going to cut a whole bunch of them down. And that's going to probably be a hard one to stomach for a lot of folks, and the education staff are going to have their hands full explaining this one, although they'll do just fine. But basically what we're looking at is I thought I could skip too. Basically, we have large areas of the preserve. From what we understand, that we're in agricultural use. And if you look at the aerial maps, you can almost see blocks that were farmed at some point in the past. The agricultural activity stopped. The adjacent pitch pine trees, which were still there, seeded into these areas, and you end up with very dense forests, which, as far as we understand, doesn't really seem to be a natural community type in the pine bush. So what we're looking at doing is taking some of those areas that are dense pitch pine scrub forests and converting them back into a pine barrens. Keeping some of the pitch pine, obviously, but opening them up again. Sort of the same thing we're doing with the scrub oak. We're trying to open everything back up. We like sunlight getting down to the ground. So we're basically trying to, if we have 65% of that 1,000 acres that we talked about, that's already in those community types, and 65% of it's in forest, what we want to do is flip that over so that 65% is in open barrens, and we have 35% in forest. So this is coming up for this fall. Here's just another, just real quickly to sort of show you the area in red. Kind of gives you what the density is that we're looking for as far as pitch pine trees in the pine barrens. And then this area over here, and some of the adjoining areas that were farmed, the density is much, much higher. So we're taking out approximately 2/3 of the trees that are in there, of the pitch pine trees. So it's, again, going to be a very dramatic change on the landscape. And I'm sure it'll get some people's attention. So this is kind of what it looks like now in those areas. And that's what we're kind of aiming for. Yeah.
I'm curious where your test plot for this is going to be. Where the first thing you're thinking about hitting.
Well, it's a good thing you asked that question, because this slide right here. We're looking at 85 acres right behind John Brust's office building, right? So, yeah. So it's basically the end of Madison Avenue Extension, water tower, and this is one of these big blocks that looks like it had agricultural activity in the past, and there's also some areas over here that are very thick with pitch pine. So this is where we're planning to start out. DEC foresters are going to be working with us. They're going to help us with the marking, cruising the timber. We're hoping that there's actually some value here, because the pitch pine does have value. I guess high-end flooring is something that has a market out there. So, you know, that, at least it's not going to cost us money to do this work.
New lobby at Delaware Engineering.
There you go. A new desk for John, but anyway. Yeah, so the marking is going to happen this fall, and then we will be actually cutting the trees and cutting the timber this coming winter.
Where you're going in and doing selective thinning on some of the smaller, I don't know if they're all very older age trees, or that there are smaller ones that perhaps a linear spade where you can take and maybe move one or two to an area that has no pitch pine at all, and other than beginning seedlings. I'm not talking huge trees, but something that is this a type of tree that can be successfully spaded if it's maybe under 5 feet tall or something like that?
Well, right up from the Discovery Center, all those pitch pines were tree spaded here from our location. We actually had planted a little nursery of pitch pines years ago. These areas don't have too many pitch pine in that. They're generally even age class, give or take, but most of them I think are too big to really run with a tree spade. in this particular site. There might be other places where that might be a possibility, but we don't have any plans to move any of these trees at this point. The other issue, of course, when you move trees, then you have a whole bunch of big holes too, so you've got to figure that out as well as far as how do you fill these holes.
And obviously, there's an additional cost.
Yes, there is.
For
Yeah.
equipment.
Yeah. Yeah, we're on the 100, 200 year time frame here as far as restoration. So planting seedlings, that's probably what we're going to continue to do in most sites that are just devoid of pitch pine ball. And next couple generations will enjoy them, take care of them as they get bigger.
So,
Yeah.
what's the impact on wildlife?
There is none.
I only ask because some of the other cutting, some of the complaints were that about deer moving into, just didn't know how this would be.
Yeah, I mean, as far as wildlife that we're sort of interested in, concerned about in the pine bush, this is all going to be about benefits to them. I don't really see a whole lot of downside. There might be specific individuals that are affected or displaced by this temporarily, but longer, within a year, I mean, a lot of stuff's coming right back, and they're going to even be enjoying it more. Deer are probably going to have more deer because they love that sort of young growth, open type of setting. So the hunters will be happy.
More of a temporary, if any impact, temporary.
Yeah, we sort of like to say that about all of our management work, although something like the black locust work, that's pretty dramatic. I mean, you've really changed it, but the stuff that we're putting back in is really benefiting the species that we're most concerned about, and as well as a whole bunch of just other ones that are more common. So again, it's that longer term thinking of it's not what's happening right this moment as much as what it's going to be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now. But I don't like hurting the wildlife any more than anyone else. But that's what I do. I'm a killer. Fire is the ultimate tool. I sort of have to throw that slide in at the end just because fire is really what's going to make this place work or not work. We can mow and chop and do everything else that we do, but ultimately, we've got to get fire back in there. So then we can figure a way to actually do that easily. Let us know. And that's all I've got. Enjoy the pine bush, and as I said at the bottom, I use this for a public presentation, but please excuse our appearance temporarily while we work to restore pine trees. Thanks. Questions?
Thanks, Joel. Now, our final presentation. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Don. I didn't see your hand.
Joel, in Chris's report, he speaks of archaeological surveys of 418 acres of black locust with ground disturbance will occur in the future. Is that the rest of the black locust area, or is there more than that?
That's pretty much it. Unless we acquire more land with black locust. But yes, we had about 700 and some acres when we started. We cleared about 250. So we are
about 20% of the land that you refer under preserved land, which you refer to as other, is black locust.
Yeah, it's a big number. Yeah, like I said, when I walk around with my supervisor and looking at all that black locust in the preserve. Think about that. And the problem with black locust, you give it another 100 years, you won't have any more pine barrens. All you'll have is black locust. So we've really been successfully able to reverse that, which is kind of a cool thing to be able to see over time. But it takes time. It takes a lot of time.
Any other questions? Sorry, Don, I didn't see your hand up. Okay, thanks, Joel.
Thank you.
Our final presentation will be by Dr. Steve Campbell to update us on Carner Blue butterfly monitoring results.
I think most of you are at least somewhat familiar with Carner Blue butterfly and our efforts here at the preserve to recover them. So I'm only going to provide just a brief overview of those topics. I want to spend most of my time sharing with you some of the, I guess you can say, difficulties in answering what seems like a simple question, and that is how many butterflies do we have at the preserve. So like I said, before I get to that, I just want to do just a brief overview, starting with the Carner Blue butterfly. So this is sort of a typical year for the Carner Blue butterfly. The eggs that overwintered hatch out around April. The larvae feed on blue lupin. They grow, they pupate. The first brood of adults emerge around May. And those adults live for about 2 to 5 days. And during that time, they mate, they lay eggs. Those eggs then develop, hatch as larvae. Those larvae feed on lupin. Again, they pupate. And then the second brood of adults emerge around July. And then those adults mate and lay eggs. And then those eggs overwinter, sort of completing the yearly life cycle for that species. And so this is what's known as a bivoltine life cycle, which is a fancy way of saying it's just 2 generations per year for these butterflies. So this here is just sort of a schematic of adult abundance over time. This first up and down represents the emergence of the first brood. This one here shows the second brood. So since the 1970s, the cardinal blue butterflies have experienced a greater than 90% decrease in their distribution and abundance. And so this sort of washed out yellowish area that you see down here, this was a historic range. Currently, they're limited to, the national populations are now limited to these areas here. So there's some populations in Wisconsin, a little bit in Indiana, Michigan, and New York. And so here in New York, these are the only national populations east of the Great Lakes. And I say that because New Hampshire had national populations, but they actually went extinct, and so they've restarted the populations there, but with captive individuals. And none of these populations are considered viable, meaning that if nothing is done to help these populations, they will very likely go extinct. So to prevent the decline of this species any further, in 1977, the DEC listed the species as endangered in New York. And then U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 1992 listed the species as endangered across its entire range. Now, when a species is listed as endangered, a recovery plan needs to be developed. And in their recovery plan are actions that are specified to help recover the species, and also within that recovery plan are criteria by which we ascertain whether or not recovery has been reached. And so for the federal recovery criteria, they're considering that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is considering the species to be recovered if there's 1 or more viable population in 13 of the federal recovery units. So that's these stippled areas that you see here. And here where we are in the Glacial Lake Albany recovery unit, Fish and Wildlife Service is calling for 3 viable populations within that recovery unit. So if we zoom in here to the federal recovery unit, you can see there's 4 state recovery units within that, here circled in red. So Fish and Wildlife Service is looking for 3 viable populations in these 4 recovery units. And then the state recovery criteria is actually calling for all 4 of these recovery units, state recovery units, to have viable populations in order for that species to be delisted. And here, the Albany Pine Bush Preserve is one of these state recovery units. And I keep talking about viable populations. A viable population is considered, that's defined as having at least 3,000 first or second brood adults in 4 out of 5 consecutive years. So it needs to be 3,000 or greater first or second brood adults over that time span. Okay, so that's just a little bit of background on the butterfly. Now a little bit about our recovery efforts. Obviously, we're in a very highly urbanized landscape, the preserve is, and so as Joel pointed out, a lot of this area that's in the preserve is sort of degraded butterfly habitat. It's not high quality cardinal blue butterfly habitat. As he mentioned, years of fire suppression has caused the incursion of the surrounding forest. So we got a lot of aspen have moved in, a lot of white pine have moved in. And then we also have lots of areas with that's been overrun by non-native invasive plants, such as black locust that he mentioned was one of our big problem species. So we sort of talked about this, so I'm not really going to go into it, but this is essentially not suitable butterfly habitat. The butterflies won't use that. So as Joel mentioned, we restore that by essentially eliminating it. Cut it down, leave any residual pitch pines that may have hung on within the stand. We remove the logs, we remove the stumps, we bury the stumps, and we're essentially starting from scratch. We're replanting native vegetation, and within that native vegetation too is lupin and other nectar species that are important for the butterfly. And then hopefully after a few years of regrowth, we get something like this. So once we restore habitat conditions, we need to maintain those habitat conditions by bringing back the processes that maintain those conditions. And in this type of fire adapted this is a fire adapted ecosystem, so that means fire. And so we bring that back with prescribed burns, but as Drill said, it's very hard to sort of bring this back. But we try to burn as much as we can, but we're obviously very limited being in the environment that we're in. Okay, so once we restore these patches, the butterflies don't just show up there, or at least not right away. So we have to help them along. And we do that by accelerating their colonization of these patches, using captive rearing and release. So we gather gravid females on site here right in the preserve, and then we take those females, and Neil drives them over to the New Hampshire Fish and Game, and there they hang on to the females until they lay their eggs, and then New Hampshire Fish and Game rears the eggs and the larvae, and then they send them back to us as pupae. And then those pupae enclose, when those pupae enclose or getting ready to enclose, we put them, eclose, when they get ready to emerge, we put them in these butterfly vents with a nectar source so they have some food. These butterflies emerge, and they're really only in there. We, I think, release them pretty much on the same day that they emerge. So we put them in those tents, they emerge, and then we take those out and we put those into the restore patches. And so this is to give you some idea of our accelerated colonization effort. So the newest numbers here in 2012, we released about 600 adults. And since 2008, we've released about 5,000 adults out to these restored areas.
Steve, there's been some effort at this as well at the local middle school, right? Farnsburg with Gilderwood.
Yeah.
Over the past few years.
Yeah,
Yeah, their numbers are rolled up in there. And what we're doing now is bringing back caterpillars from New Hampshire when they're really small, and the kids raise those out and give us back the pupa.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so we're clearly putting a lot of effort in to recover this species. So we want to know, are our efforts working? And if so, how are we doing in terms of the recovery criteria? So we need to monitor the abundance of these species. And we're doing that using a method called distance sampling. We've been doing this since 2007. And we've been doing that at different sites throughout the preserve. This just shows you what we've done in 2012. So we've done 23 hectares. And I want to say, moving forward, in terms of where I'm at with the analysis for this, right now I'm just going to give you estimates for all these dark blue areas sort of combined. So I'm not giving estimates for individual patches or for the whole preserve just yet. Just how many butterflies were in these areas that we surveyed. Okay, so now if we zoom in here, let's just look at the center patch here. We can zoom in. And so what we do at each of these patches, we put a series of transects across these patches. And then we have observers walk along those transects. And whenever they encounter a butterfly, they measure the perpendicular distance of that butterfly to the transect. And then they put those butterflies in different distance categories. And here you can see that this is just essentially a big measuring stick. You can see the different marks. That helps us put the butterflies in the proper categories. So these observers walk all of these transects throughout the preserve multiple times in the spring and the summer of every year. And so this is just to give you, this is just the raw counts that came from those efforts. So each of the lines that you see here are the distance sampling from each of the different years. And each of the points along these lines represent the raw counts in each of the different survey dates within those years. And you can also see here that you can see this is the first brood, this is the second brood, but the variation in this shows the different phenologies from year to year. And so you can see 2012, here the black line. See, this is a particularly early start for us last year, 2012. That was because it was a very, very early spring. Now, so these are just raw counts. Unfortunately, these raw counts do not directly answer our question of how many butterflies are in the preserve. So in the next few slides, what I want to do is try to show you in a very conceptual and in a very basically oversimplified way of some of the issues that we're dealing with. How do we get from these raw counts to estimates of population size? And so to get from the raw counts to estimates of population size, we need to do two things. The first thing we need to do is we need to adjust our counts for an individual survey for imperfect detection. And then the second thing we need to do is take those adjusted counts and then use those counts for each survey date to come up with an overall estimate of group size or population size. So let's start with the problem of imperfect detection. Okay, so what that means is when we're walking along a transect, we know that we're not seeing all the butterflies that are out there. And specifically, we know that our ability to detect those butterflies drops off with distance. So the farther the butterflies are from the line, the harder they are to detect. So how do we go about accounting for that? So here's sort of a very sort of toy example of that. Suppose I'm walking along a transect, and off to my right, I have 4 butterflies in each of 4 different distance classes. Now suppose I can only see butterflies in the first 2 meters. So I count 8 butterflies, but I'm missing 8 butterflies. So what I would need to do then is double this number to get to the total number of butterflies that are out there. And to make it a little more realistic, let's suppose here that I see all the butterflies that are really close to the transect line, which is here. Then suppose I only see 3 here, 2 here, 1 here. So what I need to do is I need to multiply this, adjust these counts by 1, multiply these counts by 4/3 to figure out how many are actually here, this by 2, and this by 4. And then I would sum that up and get the full 16 butterflies that are actually out there. So that's all well and good, that sort of toy example, but that's not very realistic. What do we do for real data? When we're dealing with real data, we don't know how many butterflies are out there. We don't know how many butterflies we're missing. So how do we go about adjusting our counts for that? Okay, so what we do then is we essentially use our data to figure out how is our ability change with distance. And so we take all the butterfly counts that we did within a year, and we essentially take those bins and we look at how many butterflies did we count in each of those different distance classes. And we create this histogram, which you see here. So then what we do is we fit a function to that. And this function here shows us how our ability to detect the butterflies drops off with distance. And then one of the big assumptions of this model is we have to assume that butterfly density is constant. So in the survey area, we're assuming that butterflies are sort of evenly distributed across that area. So the number of butterflies that we see here are the same as the number of butterflies that occur there are the same as the number of butterflies that occur here. And so if we do that, so then what we can do is use a little bit of calculus. We can figure out the area under this curve. So this shows us the proportion of all the butterflies that are out here. This shows us what proportion that are counted. And then we can subtract this from the overall area of this rectangle, and that gives us that what proportion of butterflies that we've missed. And so I'm really glossing over a lot of details here. This is very simplified. But this allows us then to say what proportion of the butterflies are we seeing, and then we can use that to adjust our overall counts. And so here are those adjusted counts for the second brood of 2012. So here are the raw counts, down here this red line, and then these are the counts that have been adjusted for imperfect detection. So you can see this discrepancy that you're seeing here shows that we're seeing very few of the butterflies that are actually out there. We have a very low detection probability. They're out there, but we can't see them. Okay, so now we have adjusted counts for each of the different survey periods that we were out there. Now how do we go from these survey counts from individual days to get an estimate of the entire population size, or the entire brood size? Because remember, the brood size is actually the cumulative number of adults that have come out through that entire brood. So they start emerging here. There's sort of a peak emergence here, and then they have some late risers that come out here. So we need to basically come up with, take these individual counts, combine those with what about these days that we're missing. We know that butterflies are emerging and they're dying constantly. So every few days there's sort of this complete turnover in the population. So we need to look at how many are here and sort of how many are we missing on the days that we didn't survey, and we need to sum all those up to get the total population size. And so we fit a model, again, I'm glossing over a lot of details here, but we're fitting a model that looks at emergence and mortality. Those are sort of the two big drivers of what's controlling these numbers. So butterflies emerge, they live for a few days, and then they die. So we fit a model here represented by this curve that accounts for these patterns in emergence and mortality. And then you can sort of go back in and say, okay, this is how many are emerging in each days. You can go back in and sort of fill in the days that we missed, and then you sum over that to get the total brood size. So the total number of butterflies that were in that second group. Okay, so hopefully that takes a little bit of the mystery out of this. So we're dealing with a lot of issues, and this is just to get at, like I said, a simple question of how many butterflies are out there. But I wanted to show you this to take a little bit of the mystery out of where these numbers came from. So here, now we're going to show you the results. But first I want you to note here, this is the amount of area that we've surveyed since 2007. You'll notice that it's increased. And that reflects the fact that we've been restoring habitats, releasing butterflies to those habitats, and then we've been moving some of those areas into our survey efforts. So the increase in area that we've been surveying reflects the restoration of butterfly habitat. Okay, so now if we can overlay the brood size estimates on that. So what we see is there's a couple things I want you to see. First, you see a lot of fluctuation from year to year, and that's to be expected with insect populations. But I hope what we're seeing here in the data that we have so far is maybe we're starting to see a slight increasing trend along here. And then, remember, at the beginning of the talk I mentioned a recovery threshold of 3,000 butterflies. And so it looks like in the second brood of 2012 may have exceeded this recovery threshold. And I say maybe because there's some uncertainty associated with this estimate. I'm still working on the appropriate way to calculate those confidence intervals so we can sort of put a bound on that uncertainty. But I'll feel a lot better about saying that we're above the recovery threshold if the bounds of that, if the lower bound of that confidence interval is essentially above the recovery threshold. But right now, I would say that it looks like we're seeing an increasing trend, which suggests that our recovery efforts are working. So I think that's good news. One other thing I wanted to add too about this is it looks like we're above the recovery threshold, and I think a little bit. Another piece here of the puzzle that I think suggests that we are up above the threshold is if you look at the areas that we sampled here in blue, that's really only a subset of the area of the preserve that's been restored and planted with lupin. And butterflies have been released at a lot of these other sites that you see. And so we know, at least within the last 5 years, that there's been butterflies at most, if not all, of these sites. And so we can't possibly sample all the sites out there. But what this suggests is that if we're seeing that we're probably already over the recovery threshold for the areas that we surveyed, if we know that there's other butterflies out there and there's other patches, then we're very likely to probably be above that recovery threshold for the first time. But insect populations fluctuate, so really in order to be considered a viable population, we need to keep monitoring and we need to make sure that we're over that 3,000 threshold for the next 4 years before we can really say that we have a viable population here. Okay, so that's it. I'll take any questions.
Yeah, are you, when you talk about viable populations, a lot of the butterflies you have in there are ones that you're releasing. So does that still count as a viable population?
Well, we don't count those butterflies, right? It would be silly if we just released them and then went around and counted them and said this is our population. Those sites don't actually make it in until the populations have been, I think, is it a year you wait before you start putting those in?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they release the butterflies and then so it's given them a year to establish and they'll come back the following year. And so hopefully if there's going to be major mortality that would have happened. And so the butterflies that are there are the ones that reproduce and lay their eggs and then happen. So yeah, that's the concern, which is why we don't sample those sites right after the release.
Yeah, Harvey, we only release once, 1 year at a new site. And then that's it, they're on their own. So then we start monitoring the year after. So anybody that you find is on their own.
Yes.
Okay, a couple questions. One is, when you look at the brood size estimates, we kind of added this methodology. Is that the same methodology been used throughout all the way back to 2007 that maybe you showed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I just showed 2002 for an example, but yeah, I've done that.
Okay, and then the other question is really about the method. When you're estimating brood size, it's really not individuals, because the individuals can be double counted, it seems to me. How do you incorporate some
You mean
model of mortality?
during the actual sampling that they'd be double counted, or
when you count the brood size for the entire?
Yeah. Well, that was a really rough way. Really, there's the underlying equations they're differential equations, and so what it does is essentially calculates the area under the curve and fits it sort of like a snapshot of a moment in time. So the actual model that you fit essentially accounts for that. It calculates the area under the curve and then calculated that way, so no, because if you just did it from day to day, there'd be a lot of overlap, but the actual model that's fit accounts for that, so that's a good question. Again, I figured I didn't even want to explain the math to you guys either, so I just left all that. I left that out, but there are a lot of these, and these methods aren't new. Distance sampling is a well tried and true method for counting in these situations. And then this brood size estimator that I'm using is also sort of a known way to go from counts to brood size estimates. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. Yes, Steve referred at one point in his presentation to the use of a little bit of calculus. I can tell you that that's about my extent of use of calculus too. That partly explains why I became a lawyer and not an engineer. Final item for discussion. I forgot to mention when I said that Steve was the last presentation, will be the issue of, which is an issue we've talked about before to some extent, that is the sign out by the road. The sign's a fairly new one. It continues to attract attention, some of which is good attention, some of which is, maybe less positive attention. And earlier this week, Chris received an email from an interested citizen of Guilderland commenting on the sign. So we thought we would share that email in a general sense with you, and then open it up for any discussion that the commission members may want to have.
And just before I say that, we're a little behind, but if you look at your agenda, we don't have an executive session, so that's off. Just so you know, and the action items are fairly straightforward. So I got an email from an individual from the town of Guilderland, and I should preface that saying that this is from a person who's been a long-time supporter of Pine Bush. He's been highly involved in the community in Guilderland, and I've known him for quite a while. But he sent me this email and asked that I bring it to the board, specifically about the LED sign that we have out front. The LED sign that talks about the programs that are coming out. So he was concerned. He felt that the sign was inconsistent with the environmental organization. One of the points he brought up was that the town of Guilderland specifically prohibits flashing signs, and he does recognize that it's outside the town line, but it's close enough that he feels that it may have impacts on residents who drive by. And he also pointed out the sign is very bright at night, and he asked if there was a way to reduce its brightness. So one of the things that when I got this email is I asked Wendy, who is the person who changes the sign, if there's a way we can reduce its brightness, and we may be able to do that. And some of the other concerns that we've had in the past is that when the sign has messages, that they look like they were blinking. So to reduce that scroll time, the scroll time was 3 seconds, and now it's at 6. 6 is what you'll see like on the LED billboards you'll see on like I-90 or 787. That's what it says. And then the fact that at night it would still go. So at night now it just stays static. It says 195 Carter Road. So I wanted to bring those up and get feedback from the board too. If there's other things that we can do to minimize the impact that people are feeling. I mean, I will say one thing. Obviously, we put the sign up because advertising is very, very expensive, and it's one of the most important things that we can do to get the word out about who we are and what we do. And specifically, we got feedback even from the board about the front not looking like we're open. That sign makes it look like we're open. And that sign works for what it's supposed to do. It brings people in. Smoky Bear Day in October, we had over 160 people. A lot of people saw the event on the sign. Neil had a talk for the French group. You had 50, 55, you had more than a room.
55 people, yeah.
55 people, and a lot of people saw it on the sign the day before. So it serves its purpose in that effect. But, you know, people have expressed concerns, so we'll bring it up.
So, comment, thoughts?
See, we're considering just limiting to daily hours, because that hits most of the commute, which would be a, you know, kind of a large drive-by.
Yeah, that was one of the comments that were brought up before. So it goes static at 11 p.m. and starts at 5 a.m. And it just says 195 in Carter. And that's something we can do. Can it be shut off at night? Maybe.
It can be dimmed.
It can be dimmed. We can look into that.
Okay. I think you should stipulate that the resident who complained wasn't me.
No, it's not. It's somebody, the person who complained runs the community gardens.
Okay. I'm not surprised. You know, I've talked to a couple of people in Gill about it. People have expressed some concerns. I have concerns. Steve Feeney, the chairman of the Gill and Planning Board, has some concerns. And they are to some extent grounded on an ongoing discussion, perhaps you might even say controversy, in Gilman relative to flashing signs. Currently prohibited under our zoning code. If the commission were a private sector entity looking to put a sign like that up on the road in Gilman, it wouldn't be allowed. And I have some concerns relative to consistency with organizational purpose. I certainly understand the need to promote the preserve. And I don't think I object to the notion of illuminating sign. My two big concerns have to do with, number one, intensity. It is very bright. And if it can be worked on, I think that would be a positive. The other thing is the flash. Even at a 6-second scroll time, which is equivalent to the billboards on 990, there is significant research out there that indicates scroll with illuminated signs at that speed is a significant driver distraction. I don't know if there have been any accidents on 155 related to that. I don't know if you've had anything happen out front since you put the sign in, but the research is there. 6 seconds is pretty long. I would certainly, and I think other people in the building would welcome a further reduction, a significant reduction in that frequency. On the other side of the coin, if the sign is going to be illuminated at night, why not put an event up there? Why say 195 Corner Road, yawn, you know, whatever's happening the next weekend. It's there, you know, the commission spent money on it. It is what it is, but I think it can be used a little more thoughtfully, with a little more concern for driver distraction, and with a little more consistency for organizational purpose. That's my 2 cents.
Fair enough.
Although I might use the net.
Any other comments?
Okay.
Yeah, and, you know, it doesn't necessarily even have to be on the agenda for anybody to, you know, raise the concern. So, if you don't see it on a future agenda, you know, obviously, every member of the commission has the opportunity to raise issues of their own personal concerns, so feel free to do that. If we might, then we'll move on to the action items. First item being, trying to get the color, it's color blue.
It's blue, and I'll go over that. If I can, there's a fourth action item. It's very simple. I just need to hand it out. There's a cover. Thanks, Mike and Cindy. And then the actual update to the investment policy. Take one and just pass it along. So this is an update to the policies and procedures, the employee policies and procedures. The majority of the changes in here are for clarity. As we continue along as an organization that has our own policies, our own procedures, and our own employees, sometimes we test things and recognize that we need to have things be more clear. One of the specific things in our policies is it wasn't clear what benefits were to be afforded to either a permanent staff member or a seasonal staff member. So we made those changes. And I'll give you a specific example. Seasonal employees were being treated like a full-time employee, where once you work 6 months, like anybody in any other state authority or state agency, you have accrued vacation time. So we had a situation with 2 individuals that were seasonal that worked for basically 6 months and 2 weeks. So they were given 6 days of vacation time. They weren't going to take that vacation time, but our policy requires us to pay them out. So we have seasonal employees that we're paying out for vacation time, and we just don't have the resources to do that. But before making that decision, I went and I talked to other agencies, and I said, what do you do? So I went to state parks, and Parks, who has a lot of seasonals, they pay them out, but they have the resources to do it. So then I went to NHT, who we used to work with. They have a number of seasonals. They probably have 40 to 50 seasonals a year, and they don't because they can't afford it. So when I talked to, there's a development authority in the North Country, I asked them because they have seasonal employees, and they don't do it either. So it just made sense not to do that, primarily from a fiscal standpoint. So those are really the changes that are in it. And those changes are tracked for you. You can see them if you have any questions. That's it.
Is there any discussion on action item A?
That's also something smaller municipalities also do with seasonal employees.
That's a good point, Mike.
Where at the end of that season, for lifeguards for local pools and parks programs, at the end of that summer season, they're terminated, and then next spring, they're guessing the letter they're interested in team next year.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Any other?
Okay, then we'll ask for a motion to advance action item A.
Second.
Okay. All in favor of adopting action item A as laid out in your packet, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Action item A is approved unanimously. Action item B is an item that I'm actually proposing, approving the appointment of Mike Lyons to represent Supervisor Mahan on the audit committee, fill the vacancy of Bill Bruce, who we know at our last meeting is now retired and is no longer a member of the commission. So if you look at the salmon colored item, you see it's a pretty simple proposal. And we're basically looking to get Mike onto the audit committee to replace Bill Bruce. Is there any discussion on action item B? And I'll entertain a motion to advance it to a vote. Second. Okay. All in favor of adopting action item B, appointing Mike to represent Supervisor Mahan on the audit committee, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Okay, unanimously adopted. Thank you.
Gene, do I need to abstain from that vote?
Yes, I think so.
That's a good point.
So no.
Mike did not vote on that. Very good. Unanimous with the exception of one abstention. Finally, Chris, do you want to discuss action item C?
This is, Carroll Real Estate is the company that manages our facility, our Discovery Center, building, grounds, et cetera. We have worked with them since 2008. This is, if this was the contract, our contract with them is coming to an end at the end of this month. So I'll state that up front. If it wasn't, we would still be looking at this contract because under the Public Authorities Law, any multi-year contracts have to be reviewed by the board annually. So you may see some contracts coming up if we have annual or multi-year contracts, for example, with our audit company. Their contract is coming to an end. They are proposing to, we're proposing just basically amending their current contract, but it's ultimately a new contract. It's a new 2-year contract with a 1-year extension, and it's what we would call a sole source contract, so it's not going out to bid. The reason that we're doing that is because they have, not only do they have developed expertise that we're not going to find from another management company to do work specifically on our exhibits. Their one staff person who works here, their maintenance person, can now fix our exhibits, which is pretty fortunate. But number 2, they propose to keep their price level flat for the next 3 years. And they, when they bid on this last time, they were the only bidder out of 10. And the first time we bid it, they were the low bidder. So all that put together is summarized in a memo that's in this packet for you. And I did that not because we have to, but I think it's important. If we're going to sole source contracts and not go out to bid, we need to justify it, and I want that in a file. So if we're audited, we can justify it. And Larry reviewed that based on our purchasing and procurement guidelines of the Public Authorities Law, and it passes the tests. So I need a approval to do that, so I need a motion.
I'll make that. Okay. Second? Okay. All in favor of adopting action item C as outlined in your packet, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Thank you. Passes unanimously. And thank you, Larry, for doing the research to enable us to make that decision. Final item is the item that Chris just handed out, action item D.
And
go ahead.
I'll thank Larry for this too, because Larry pointed out our investment policy, which Mike Duran pointed out when he was giving the presentation from Key. Our investment policy references a finance committee throughout, and we no longer have a finance committee. That committee is now called the audit committee, and it has multiple functions. So that's the change in the investment policy. But I need a resolution to formally change it.
Any discussion on item D?
Just a quick question. Is it under PRRR required to have a finance committee?
That's a good question, because Mike Lyons asked the same thing. We don't have a finance committee because we don't issue debt.
Okay, fair enough.
And I asked the ABO the same question.
We're down the wall with issue debt.
I'm sure they do.
I'm not crazy.
No, you're right.
Any other discussion or questions? Then we'll entertain a motion to advance item D to a vote. Second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor of adopting action item D as laid out in your board packet, please say aye.
Oh, did we not pass minutes in the beginning?
We did. Yeah. Any opposed, say nay. Okay, action item D is approved unanimously. And our final item on the agenda is future business.
Before we go off, I think it would be worthwhile, since we're talking about 25 years, that Paul Russell, who was in the room to begin with, is someone who was actually there at the beginning and had something to do with the creation of the Albany Pine Bush. And I think that his 25 years needs to be recognized at this point.
I agree.
He left.
He left?
Yeah.
What's the actual date? Do you know the date, Chris?
No, it's. I think it's in October.
Okay, so it'd probably be appropriate at our September meeting.
Yep.
To,
Yeah, we could.
why don't we plan on that? Thank you, Harvey. That's a good suggestion. And if there's anybody else that anybody can think of who played a critical role in the formation and development of this body, we should try to recognize them as well. So think about that.
If we're still planning an event.
Yeah.
25 years. So if we're going to do that, we're going to need some feedback from the board for people who should be invited to that and recognize that.
Paul's the only one I can think is still active. There's people like Darwin and such, but I think Paul's the only one I can think of that is still active here after 25 years.
Yep.
I might be missing someone, but that's...
No, that's it, because Tom Lyons retires at the end of this
Right,
month.
so did Darwin.
Yep. Okay.
Darwin is still active, though. He's come back to us as a volunteer.
Yeah.
Oh, yes? Okay, great.
Yeah.
I take it back then, we've got two.
Yeah, great. That's a great suggestion, though, Harvey. Thank you. And we definitely need input and ideas on how we appropriately recognize the people that need to be recognized. Okay, our final item is future business, future meetings. As you can see on there, our next meeting is scheduled for June 20th, 9:30, and then in September 19th and December 19th. Thank you, everybody. Hope that spring really arrives soon, and we'll see everyone, if not sooner, in June. Thank you.